If I were to ask you this morning, what is the gospel? Would you have a ready answer to give me? If I were to give you a few minutes to think, would you come up with something decent? I come from a non-religious background. My parents were the typical products of the Quiet Revolution in Quebec. I know that many of you guys, when I say you guys, I'm talking to all of you, but more specifically even to the youth and the young adults of this church. So I'm fully aware that many of you guys probably don't know what I'm talking about when I speak of the Quiet Revolution. And if you like history, maybe you can Google it after. But basically, it led to a general I think we can almost call it hatred for religion in the population, in the society in general. And so that's the context in which I grew up. It's also the context in which I became a Seventh-day Adventist. 16 years ago that was. But it's only, I would say, about 2 years ago that I really started to see the gospel more clearly, that I started to study it more deeply, that I started to see how amazing it is. I had had an experience that had led me to study the topic of righteousness by faith. Anyone familiar with this? Anyone familiar with this expression, righteousness by faith? I see Pastor Bob, but I'm sure other people have also heard it before. But thank you, Pastor Bob. And so I wanted to know at this time what it meant. What was righteousness by faith? I studied a bit of the history of righteousness by faith in our church as well. And this is what led me to the study and the discovery of the gospel. And so before we get into this, because now every time I am given an opportunity to speak, I want to talk about the gospel. I want to talk about righteousness by faith. But before we do that, we are going to look at some things in Revelation just to set up the table. Is that okay with everyone? So I know these are not the best looking angels you've ever seen. They were supposed to be actually a bit prettier than that, but it's to keep your attention going. So these three angels, basically what are they? They are symbols of you and I and the messages that we are supposed to be announcing to the world, right? So if we do a quick overview. So first angel, he has the everlasting gospel to preach to all the world, right? That's his mission. Then we have angel number 2, who says Babylon is fallen. And then angel number 3 says, watch, it's a warning against the mark of the beast. So if we analyze all this, and especially the third angel, what's the time context that we're talking about? It's the end time, right? Do we all agree that we're in the end time? Yes, emojis again. Supposed to be prettier, but anyone afraid of the end time? It's supposed to be. Anyone afraid of the end time? No, everyone's cool with the end time? Good, good, good. That's even better. So this is what the three angels look like very quickly. And then, right at the end of the warning, the big warning against the mark of the beast, we have this verse. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. What to say about this? Righteousness by faith is vast. There's a lot of things that we can say about it. But this is the quickest summary that we can make of it. They keep the commandments of God, so they are righteous, and they have the faith of Jesus. It's been said that righteousness and faith go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. You need one in order to get the other. You need faith in order to have righteousness. But why is it presented right at the end of the three angels' messages? Anyone see this very clearly right off the bat? I didn't for the longest time. And this is a question that I will answer at the end of the presentation. But in the meantime, let's skip a few chapters. And if we go to chapter 18, we'll discover another angel, sometimes referred to as the fourth angel. So we had angel 1, 2, 3, and then in Revelation 18, we have a fourth angel. And if we look down a few verses after the presentation of this angel, we find the 7 last plagues. So at the end of the third angel, we are warning against the mark of the beast. So we figure out that we are at the end time. And then if we're talking about the 7 last plagues, we're even more at the end time. So it says this: I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. So we know we're in the end time, and what this angel does is that, the result of him is that something goes. His glory illumines the whole world. So I want to compare this to Matthew 24, verse 14, which says, "This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." So, in these two passages, both are talking about the end time. Both have something about the world or the whole world. In Revelation 18, the angel's glory fills the world, while in Matthew 24, the gospel is preached to all the world. So could it be that this angel's glory is actually the gospel that goes to all the world? So here's a summary of what we've been saying so far. We have an angel whose mission is to preach the gospel. We have eventually the warning against the mark of the beast. We have righteousness by faith that's being presented to us. We have the fourth angel's glory, or the gospel, that goes to all the world. And then that's it. It's the end of the world. But what is the gospel? And how come we haven't yet fulfilled our mission completely? If we go back to Matthew, it says that the gospel will be preached to all the world, and then the end will come. And we know that there still are places where the gospel hasn't entered yet. We know that we all have friends, we all have people, we all know people who don't know Jesus very well. So the mission that's been given to us hasn't yet been fulfilled. But why? Is it possible that we got stuck somewhere in those steps? Is it possible that our understanding maybe isn't where it should be? Is it possible that we're not living the gospel the way we could? So let's talk about it. So, righteousness by faith. As I said, the topic is vast, it's deep, there's a lot of things we could say about it. But this morning I want to tackle it from a very specific angle, and that of Jesus is God's Son, and we are God's children. I was looking for a head-scratching emoji because I'm guessing that you don't know where I'm going with this. What's the connection between the two? So if you follow me closely, I hope that you will be able to see it just as well as I do. So Jesus is God's son, we are God's children. So we're going to start with us as God's children. In the Bible, two statuses are presented as opposition. They are contrary. And it's the slave and the son, or daughter, obviously. So Paul tells us that we've been set free from sin. We have liberty by which Christ has made us free. We're no longer slaves, but sons and daughters. So Jesus freed us from bondage, from the bondage of sin. This liberation is done. Our chains have been broken. And when we're free, what should this look like? John 8:34 and 36 say, we'll get back to the middle verse 35 in a minute, but it says, most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. You shall be free indeed, yes. If the slave commits sin, then what about the free? We've just read in Romans 6:18 that we've been set free from sin. So the free does not sin. Is that interesting or is that scary? A scary thought. If we've been set free from sin and are no longer slave to sin, then why are we still struggling with sin? To find out, we'll do a little case study. But first, we will play Guess the Bible Character. And I'm going to show you a few images, and I don't know how they would look like, so it may not work, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so can you guess who this is? Yes. I heard it. Okay, so the arrow's not supposed to be there. Oops. Oh, yeah, it's an older version. So yeah, it's the Prodigal Son that we're going to be talking about. So I know that you know the story, but I will summarize it for you anyways. So this Prodigal Son, this son of his father, had also another brother. He was the youngest. And one day he went up to his father and he asked him for his part of the inheritance, which is not really normal because usually that's something we get when someone has died already. But against all odds, the father agreed. And so the son took the money and left. And he went to a place and all we know is that he wasted his money on things not very important. And then he obviously ran out of money and he had to find a job in order to support himself. So the only thing he could find was work on a pig farm. And there was a drought, so even the boss could not feed him, and he ended up eating pig food. Anyone interested in eating pig food? Are you there? Yes? Anyone interested in pig food? Not really. So he was sitting there one day and it dawned on him that at his father's house, even the servant are not treated this way. And so he decided that he would go back. And he started walking back to his father's, but thinking because he knew, or he thought, he was no longer worthy to be his father's son. And so he rehearsed a speech to tell his father that went something like this: Father, I am no longer worthy to be your son, but take me as a servant and I will serve you. And then as he was approaching home, The father saw him from afar, and he couldn't believe it. It's my son. So he started running back to his son, and when he got to him, he embraced him, and the son never actually was able to finish his speech to his father. But what was wrong with the son's prepared speech? John 8:35, our middle verse from the earlier passage, says, "And a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever." In this verse and the story of the prodigal son, sons and slaves are presented as opposites. Slaves are not free, obviously, while sons and daughters are. The son abides forever. In other words, it is impossible for a son or a daughter to lose his sonship title. He will never cease to be his father's son. He had long stopped considering himself a son, but that makes no difference on the reality of his sonship to his father. In the father's eyes and in the father's heart, the son never stops being a son, and the father's hope that his son would come back never died. Could this apply to us with God? Is it possible that sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we just don't see ourselves as sons and daughters anymore? We think we've lost God's favor because of some things we've done. We think God is mad at us or disappointed in us, and that we have to gain his love back. We think we've lost our sonship or daughtership status. But if we're not a son or a daughter in our minds, what does that make us? It makes us a slave, a servant. And when we see ourselves as a mere servant or as a slave, that manifests itself in two ways. Slaves do two things. Slaves serve, and they hope to serve well enough that they might gain some status, that they might get something. In other words, Lord, I do this for you, and you do this for me. Or Lord, I will behave properly, and you save me. In other words, it's legalism. But the problem with legalism is that it's not God's way of saving us. It's a deception. We deceive ourselves if we think that we can do things to please God and get something in return. It's not that our good works or anything good that we do, any good behavior, don't please God. But we already have his favor. We already have his love. He already died. Christ already died for us and save us. Christ already died for us. We cannot earn the favor of God or the love of God. We can only accept it and go with it. So legalism is one way in which spiritual slavery manifests itself. And here's another way. Slaves serve the person or the thing they are enslaved to. So if I think that I'm enslaved to sin, what's going to happen? Logically, you are quiet, but I'm sure that you're thinking it in your mind. If I think I'm enslaved to sin, I am going to sin. Isn't that logical? we are really free. But if we dismiss that information, what comes up is not freedom, it's slavery. But Paul tells you, that you are no longer a slave, but a son or a daughter. And if a son or a daughter, then an heir of God through Christ. But in order to benefit from this, in order to see the reality of it in our lives, we need to accept it. We need to believe it. And as long as we don't believe it, we'll be stuck in a legalistic religion and we'll struggle with the same sins over and over instead of growing into a righteous character. Does that make any sense? So, my understanding of and my faith in my identity in Christ, that is, a child of God set free from sin and not a slave to sin, leads me to act like a child of God, therefore produces righteousness. So it's simple, right? I believe that I am a child of God, and the result is righteousness. And I want to make something clear right away. When I say righteousness, I don't mean overnight you become perfect, you become righteous, you always do the same thing. But it sets you on a path of development and spiritual growth and becoming a better person, better and able to make the right decisions, do the right things, obey God's law. Now Jesus, because we said that we're talking about us as being children of God and as Jesus as being the Son of God. So in 1 John 5, it says, "For whatever is born of God," that would be us, children of God, born of God. "Whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that overcomes the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God?" So we do have us as whatever is born of God overcomes the world. That's us. And then we do have Jesus as the Son of God. So from what we know from this verse, quickly, faith is the victory that overcomes the world. So I'm sure you know the song. The person who believes that Jesus is the Son of God is an overcomer. Did you ever think about that? That strikes me. Is it that simple? I believe that Jesus is the Son of God and I can have victory over sin? Here's another one. Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him and he in God. Now that verse has to be one of my favorite verses in the Bible, because this verse actually literally changed the direction of my spiritual walk with God. I've told this story to some of you already, but I'll try to go quick. I was struggling with something, and I knew full well that it was a big problem, and I really wasn't in a good spiritual place at that time. And I tried. Many times I just made the decision, okay, this is over, this is it, this is out of my life, I'm done with it. And I'm sure you can guess that it didn't work. The thing kept coming back at me, and I kept on falling. And then I read a book, that's about 3 years ago, I would say. I read a book and this verse was emphasized in it. And I figured, well, if God abides in me, there's got to be some victory over there. There's got to be some virtue in this. I really didn't understand the whole mechanic of why confessing that Jesus is the Son of God result in God's abiding, but I tried it. So every day, every morning or so, I would pray, and in my prayer, I would just confess. No problem confessing. I believe it. I just don't know what it means really, but I believe it. So I would just confess that Jesus is the Son of God. And I kid you not, the thing I had been struggling with for so long left me. So much so that I didn't even realize it right away. I went on with my life, and a few, maybe weeks later, I realized that, wow, it's gone. I made zero effort into it. It was just gone. So we have, believing that Jesus is the Son of God leads to overcoming. Confessing from a believing heart, I guess, that Jesus is the Son of God leads to God abiding in you. Because God's presence in me can only produce victory over sin, I guess. In other words, for victory over sin, we need God abiding in us and us in Him. And the belief and confessing that Jesus is the Son of God achieves that. Isn't that amazing? That is truly some righteousness by faith. I believe, faith, that Jesus is the Son of God ends up in overcoming sin or righteousness. But why? Why in the world is believing that Jesus is the Son of God so powerful? And I'll be honest with you, I've been talking about this verse for years, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand. I was going around it, I was trying to explain it. And even as I was preparing for today's sermon, things came up to me. I believe the Holy Spirit was talking to me and revealing things to me that I had no idea before. I couldn't put my finger on it. So, if I were to ask you, Son of God, is that Jesus' divine or human title? In other words, when we say Son of God, does that refer to Jesus being God, or does that refer to Jesus being human? He is both. I am totally not disputing that he's both man and God. But this title, what does it refer to? So we will take a vote, actually. I want everyone to side on either Son of God means Jesus is divine, or Son of God means Jesus is human. So who thinks that it means that Jesus is divine? Everyone has to vote. Okay. So all the rest of the people think it means Jesus is human? Can I see the hands? Okay, a lot of people did not vote. But we had more people thinking that it means that Jesus is divine than that Jesus is human. Well, I thought up to recently that it meant that Jesus was divine, as opposed to Son of Man, which would refer to Jesus as being a human being. But then I read a book called The Sonship of Christ, written by Ty Gibson, for those of you who know this preacher. And I understood that actually it most likely means that Jesus is human. He goes on to say, to present Jesus's genealogy, Luke's genealogy of Jesus in Luke 3. And he says that Jesus is the son of Joseph, son of, eventually we get to David, son of Abraham, son of Adam. And what's missing there is that Adam was the son of God, directly. Adam was the son of God, and Jesus is the second Adam. We know this from 1 Corinthians 15. We also know that the people of Israel were called God's son. Actually, God called them my son. Israel was a type of Jesus. And if we compare the few chapters of Matthew with the Exodus experience of Israel from Egypt to the Promised Land, we see that the same sequence Jesus is following from what Israel has gone through. And so Jesus succeeded where Adam failed, and Jesus also succeeded where Israel failed. Jesus is named Son of God after other men who were named sons of God. But again, why does it matter so much that we believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that we understand it? Jesus was God's firstborn, not in time, obviously, but in importance. Jesus was God's only begotten Son. Jesus was God's first fruit. And we're the ones coming after him as fruits. We're his brothers and sisters. We're God's adopted sons and daughter. Why does it matter? It matters that Jesus is the Son of God because that's what allows us to be the children of God. And you're very quiet, and I don't know what you're thinking. But when I realized this, because as I said, I've been thinking about this verse forever. Well, not forever, but for years, and I couldn't really understand why it mattered so much that Jesus is the Son of God. And Tuesday night, as I was pretty much done writing the sermon, and I was just polishing it and fixing it, this finally came to me. It matters that we believe that Jesus is the Son of God because it's the only way we can be children of God. Two more verses. Romans 8:29 and 30. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he predestined, these he also called. Whom he called, these he also justified. And whom he justified, these he also glorified. It's a long passage, but I see two things. Well, I see a few things. The firstborn among many brethren. So we have Jesus, the firstborn, and then us as his brothers and sisters. I also see that we are predestined to be conformed to the image of Jesus. So I understand that being like Jesus is not so much a requirement as it is a promise. And not only a promise, but not something that we achieve ourselves, but that God does in us. Last verse. He who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified, he is not ashamed to call them brethren. So we see justification, we see sanctification, we see glorification. These are essentially the three components of our salvation. And to get there, God became a son that we might be children of God, his brothers and sisters. So what is the gospel? Well, I don't know what your answer would be, but mine would maybe go like this. The incarnation, the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus, and the power this has over my life and destiny. My justification, sanctification, and glorification by the Son of God, the eternal God of heaven become a son, that we might be the children of God, the infinite love of God that makes all this possible. At the beginning, I also asked, why has the gospel not yet reached the whole world? In other words, what are we still doing here? Guys, if we don't really get the gospel, if we're not really transformed by the gospel, how can we preach it in a way that will be illustrated by an angel's glory illuminating the earth? And guys, righteousness by faith is really our only shot